All right, so we're back with the Next Generation Business Network. It's been, I think, somewhere close to 6 months. John is a super enthusiastic Global MBA candidate at Korea University. He's empowering future leaders and project teams to master our Deca either role play or written event. And that's the great thing about John is he has judged both. So really, if you are looking to make it to ICDC this year, I'd recommend spending this 10-15 minutes listening to this chat that we're about to have. And yeah, the first question I have for you, John, is can you tell us a little bit about your background, maybe how you got into Deca, what do you like about it, and that type of nature?
Absolutely, and thank you for that introduction, Ethan. So I've been a competitive event judge for going on 10 years now, not just with Deca, but FBLA, speech and debate. And that came from having competed in these types of events in high school and wanting to pay it forward to students in the next generation. And I'm currently a MBA student at Korea University, using that as a springboard to work into the region's automotive industry.
So for all the events in Deca, you have to have that presentation in front of a judge where you will be evaluated, unless you're doing the virtual events, which have come out recently. My specific question for you, John, is what differences do you see between evaluating that prepared research report or project, such as the financial literacy project, versus the not prepared live role play presentation?
There's some very key differences. Some people may like the role play because in theory, they think there's not a lot of prep for it, right? You just kind of show up, you give an answer, but that's the wrong case. There is probably just as much preparing that you have to do for a live role play as you do for a prepared event. It's just exactly what you do is different. When you do a prepared report, right, you have a function, you have a format for how you're supposed to answer, right? You have your scoring rubric as your guide. And so you're finding an idea, you're finding an opportunity, and you're filling out a report that solves it, right? And you're trying to make it as best as you can. When you present on it, you now have to condense that information into a 10-minute presentation, leaving time for questions and answers to be as clear to an audience as possible to convince the judge, like, hey, this is something that's going to work. Versus in a live role play, you're given a situation. Instead of working out the research process, you need to prepare and understand your thinking process, your decision-making process. When you formalize and think through how you make decisions, that's how you win the live role play events, right? And how can you articulate that to a judge, your decision process, why you chose that, explaining the value and priority hierarchy that you give? That's the kind of preparing that you have to do for a live role play.
What are the common strengths that high-scoring written research projects have, such as business operations research or finance operations research? And do you think it has to do with the evaluation form, such as what methods they use to describe the research or the nature of budgets or strategies or approaches for leading change? Do you think it's more of this, or essentially what are those strategies that you see in those high-scoring written research projects?
Tip that I would give for students aiming for the top 10% in their event, something I don't see often utilized, is practicing submitting your report to business professionals, people in your community, getting as much feedback as possible. Are you waiting to hear the feedback from your first judge before you make any adjustments? Why do you have to wait, right? You can get more insight talking with people in your community. Just like how Ethan took the time to reach out to me, you have the ability to work and prepare your presentation now before your next competition. You don't have to rely on your next scoring, because when talking with them, you'll understand more perspectives on what they might view as weak areas or opportunities in your report or presentation. If you talk to someone who's in consulting or in the context area of your presentation, they might be able to give you some more high-level insight. right? A project manager might say, oh, this is a very decent budget, but usually somebody, when reviewing a proposal, would like to see XYZ elements in your budgeting, right? Like a range or whatever. And that might be those exceed expectation elements that you need to cinch those last points. So again, present, get feedback on your report from as many relevant people as possible before your competition event. And that's how you can really fine tune it before you go in.
That was great, yeah. I'll just intertwine, I'll put that part in.
Sure, whatever.
I have to.
The first thing is everything that they've proposed, researched, found, concluded in their report is clearly linked to the research that they've done. It's clearly outlined. They're not just pulling this number out of thin air. Hey, here's where we got our basis points from that. And they didn't just leave it towards the end of the bibliography for me to try to connect the dots. It's stated right there. Hey, here's our expected budget. This numbers came from X, Y, and Z based on a realistic average or range, et cetera, et cetera. And lastly, it's a very realistic and very specific budget. You'll be especially at nationals, you'll be talking with business professionals, people who actually make the decisions on budgets like these. And so we're very quick to know, like, those numbers don't seem very right, or they seem too rounded. And even $1 million, I don't know how specific you are on the components of that, right? So when we see proposals, written research reports that are very specific, you have the receipts for all the numbers, the points you're making attached to that. You're going to see a lot of head nods. Well, I guess you won't because it's written. But if we were in the presentation, you'd see a lot of head nods acknowledging that the judges see and get the information you have and are viewing this as they would a regular business proposal.
I've interviewed like 4 role play winners, first place. And some of them, they say, listen, Ethan, I just memorized a bunch of jargon and a bunch of terms and a bunch of frameworks. I go in and whatever it is, we throw it together and that's what it is, right?
Yeah.
But when we're talking about that research report, it doesn't matter how much jargon you know. It seems more as you really, really want to understand, or the judge needs to understand, where you're coming from for every little aspect. Or at least those big numbers, like your budget. So this kind of leads into my next question. I'm curious, how should students approach judges' questions in that role play scenario?
That's a great question. And it actually relates back to a previous one and what you just mentioned in how some high-performing competitors use frameworks. Again, frameworks, outlines of decision-making are the key for live role-playing events. Because if you do that well, you'll find the questions from judges, they'll be a lot easier. Because some key things that you need to identify in these role-playing events when you're faced with a scenario, who are the stakeholders, i.e. who are all the people that are affected by the scenario? What are the priorities of values and importance? What's priority number 1, 2, 3, 4? Do you understand why, and can you defend that? And then make the decision tree. A lot of the times, questions from judges, especially at regionals and states, will just focus on those things, right? Trying to understand. But if you can already say that throughout your interactions, you've covered half the battle. When you get to nationals, what those questions will look like, if you've already done a great job in those areas, it's going to look like they're going to challenge your thinking on that. They're going to deeper into why do you think that stakeholder is more important? Why is this a higher priority? Some of them who might have industry experience or have been in this situation may propose to you a different idea or alternative. What do you think about that? Or why didn't you choose that way? Which that'll still put you on your feet, but you just have to take it as it comes. But again, if you have those key frameworks in place, knowing your stakeholders, the priority of values, and the decision-making process you're making, that makes a lot of questions a lot easier.
What strategies do you think could help a student to stay calm, confident, and composed so that they can give the best presentation possible during that role play?
The short answer is, I think, a confidence in presentation, it's a prerequisite. If you're going for the top 10%, if you're trying to place at nationals, that's a given. Now, granted, at the end of the root and the end of the day for this competition is that we're trying to help you guys learn. And for some of you, that's developing your presentation skills. Judges get that. And not everyone is at that level of presentation. So at regionals and states, you'll find judges can be patient, and they can still pierce out and recognize key elements of your presentation. But again, it is a lot clearer. It is a lot more reassuring when we hear and feel that confidence from a speaker, right? So again, a valid point, but again, everyone is here to grow. And just because you're confident, but you don't have any substance, doesn't mean you're going to win either, right? So let's talk about some strategies that work for staying confident and calm during a role play. There's a variety out there. I'm sure you can Google some quick ones that I kind of like to do. Like if it's a prepared event, sometimes I play like some of my favorite upbeat jams before going into a competition. I have a little like self-dance jam around the corner in the conference. Other times I kind of remind myself like, hey, these judges are not, they're not here to tear me down. They're here because they're excited to see the presentation. They're here to help, right? So remember, they're not the enemy, they're the ally. And sometimes it's just that initial walk into the presentation when everything hits you inside. My personal tip is I like to out-enthuse the judge. Don't go crazy, but I'm like, good morning, judges. And they're like, oh, good morning back. So sometimes you're going to have those very stonewall judges.
Right. That's what I had. Stonewall. And are you ever nervous when someone's walking like, oh my God, this is, what's going to happen here? Or no, it's just.
Yeah, absolutely. I faced those before as well.
And the stonewall is real.
Yeah, especially for like job interview related events. Yeah. They definitely are trying to see where your confidence is on that, right? If you're able to kind of relax that, again, I like to out-enthuse the judge. I just start with a very strong, upbeat good morning to them, and they'll usually reply in kind. You could be their cup of coffee going into their presentation that perks them up. They'll usually respond back with some level of positive energy back. But it's not just about that to lighten how the judge looks to you. It's also kind of like fake yourself into it, right? Fake it till you make it. If you go in upbeat, even though on the inside you're like, it will help a ton as you go into your presentation.
So I'm really interested in what you think has made that difference when you're grading for you to say, listen, she was great, but she was a little better in terms of the scores. Do you think it's a creativity thing, a technical thing like a performance indicator or an evaluation? Is it the enthusiasm? And of course, this is different for every judge, but for you, what do you think is that differentiating factor that really lets people come away with the win on those margin calls?
At the end of the day, there's only so much room to differentiate presentations. Like literally meeting expectation and exceeding expectation, the category is oftentimes just a 1-point difference. So we have to be very reserved, especially at nationals, on giving out that exceed expectation. So here's kind of like the priority flow for like when trying to figure out between two competitors. The first thing is, obviously, the minimum expectation. Have you adhered to the scoring rubric and all requirements? That's the first check mark. The second one is ensuring there's no errors, no grammar errors, no nothing, because keep in mind, a lot of us judges, we have 10 to 20 competitors with 20 pages reports each. So we can find one quick thing to not give you exceed expectations on grammar or whatever. It makes us a little bit easier on that decision process. It sucks, but it's the truth, right? So you've adhered to scoring rubric. You've ensured that there's no errors on your report or in your presentation. The third point is exceeding expectation elements. What did they incorporate? How many different exceeding expectation elements did they incorporate? For when I talk about exceeding expectations elements, I say it's things that we as judges would be surprised that you learned about in high school. So, for example, with that poster behind you, behavioral economics, I learned that in college. If I saw a student who adhered to everything in the scoring rubric, had no errors, covered all the other information, but then they added this other element of behavioral economics for their rationale, that's an exceed expectation for me on that category, right? And sometimes it's just kind of counting up how many elements of exceed expectations does one team have versus the other. Because at the end of the day, we're only gonna make a tiebreaker point in one subcategory, right? But hopefully that kind of gives you an idea for how judges will make those decision calls when it comes down to just a point difference.
Right. What is those little natures of being a judge that might help a student kind of get where you're coming from before they enter the presentation room?
That's a great question. So let's start off where these judges come from. Most of the judges have not done the event that you're judging, right?
Extremely
so
important.
when you as a competitor, right, you're not talking to somebody, most cases, that has a deep understanding of this stuff. But you need to be able to explain to the presentation as if you're talking to an entirely new person who has had no idea. And that's just a true presentation skill, right? Can you talk slowly? Can you talk effectively? Can you break down those very key and important points, not get lost in all the jargon, so they can understand you, right? If someone off the street can understand, hey, this is the situation, here's the issue, here's our plan to fix it, here's why we think it's going to be successful, and then they can walk away with that, having had no prior knowledge on that stuff, you've got some great presentation skills there. So keep that in mind, especially for local and state judges. For nationals, that's where you probably get some more experienced judges, both in business industry as well as having done judging in the past, where they might challenge you a bit more. But that's kind of what judges are like, kind of going into the event, kind of how we're initially thinking of things, and how you, being an effective presentation speaker, is how you can really win over especially judges at the local and state level. I appreciate the opportunity to talk and share my thoughts with you guys, and best of luck for you all on your competitions.